What is up, guys? Welcome to the channel. My name's Micah, and today we're going to talk about what to look for and what to check on a bike when looking to purchase a used motorcycle. So buying a used motorcycle seems to be kind of a scary thing for a lot of people. A lot of people think they have to buy a new motorcycle because they don't exactly know what to look for and what to check on a bike that's been used. Now, I have bought plenty of used bikes, and buying a used motorcycle is a great way to get the most bang for your buck. So I've got a buddy's motorcycle here, and we're just gonna pretend that this is a bike that we are going to look at, that we've seen on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and I'm gonna show you everything that I would check and that I would look over if this were a used bike that we were thinking about buying. So hopefully this helps some people out. The goal of this video, you might as well get out a pen and paper and write down all the points, everything that we're checking, so you just have a list, so when you're going to look at that used bike, you know exactly what you're looking for. Now, in front of us here, we have a 2008 Yamaha FZ6, but I'm gonna present this in a way that it would apply to about any motorcycle out there. So without further ado, let's rip into it, guys. So now the first thing you're gonna wanna do, just walk around the bike, right? Pretty simple. We're gonna make sure that that bike is in the same condition as the photos that we looked at. So at this part, I just walk around the bike, full circle, 360, and I'm being very observant, making sure a lot of times people will take photos of a motorcycle right when they buy it. You know, say that was in the summer, they're listing it for sale in the winter, so those photos could be 6 months old. You know, the bike has had 10,000 miles put on it since those photos, and it's been laid over on both sides. So at first, we're kind of just doing an evaluation on the bike. So for example, say this bike was advertised low miles in excellent condition. At this point, I'm looking around to make sure that it is in excellent condition. I'm not getting too nitty-gritty at this point. Now, something to note, if a motorcycle has the stock exhaust on it, chances are it's been babied. A lot of times when you see aftermarket exhausts on bikes, he has rode the crap out of this thing. But so like I said, we're not getting too nitty-gritty. I'm just making sure I don't see any obvious problems, leaks, anything like that. Now, what I'm doing at this point as well is I'm evaluating and trying to see if the bike has ever been laid over before. Now, it's not a big deal if a motorcycle has been laid over before. I mean, there's the riders who have gone down and the ones who will go down. But some of the things on the bike that I check to see if it's laid over, we're gonna look at the side of the engine here. A lot of times when it gets laid over, you'll see little scuffs. Now, I do see this bike does have frame sliders on it, and I can see some little spots here. It's clearly been down on this side. So seeing that, I instantly go to look at the pegs and the gear shift to make sure the integrity of those isn't compromised. I mean, it's not a deal breaker if a bike has been laid down. There's a few little scuffs and scratches there. Couple more on the bottom of the gear shift, but everything looks straight. That looks just fine. So then we'll move up to the controls here. So we can see a little spot on the bottom of the bar end here. On our lever too, you can see some little spots there. It's clearly been down. So then I'm looking, okay, there's a few little scuffs on the gas tank, a little spot up here on the front fairing, and then just barely a nick on the mirror. So now we clearly know that this motorcycle has been down on the right side. Now, nothing looked broken or jeopardized. There's not anything that we would immediately need to repair. But if the seller had this bike priced at a point where it should be excellent condition, low miles, and running perfect, seeing the little spots of rash around this, you know, we instantly know the bike isn't quite worth full blue book of if it were in perfect condition. So while this stuff might not make any difference to you, just know that down the road, a dealership or another buyer is probably not gonna give you full price for this bike with it having those things. So we'll keep on inspecting here. So now, after we've walked around the bike, we've kind of done just a brief evaluation. You're just gonna wanna get on the bike, you know? So at this point, I'm sitting on the bike. Make sure that bike bike fits you. So many times people see pictures of bikes or they look at it on paper and they think that's the motorcycle for me. I want it. It's going to be perfect. But they've never sat on it. They've never felt how that motorcycle feels under them. So sit on the bike. See what you think of the riding position. You know, if this is going to be a motorcycle that you drive all the time, you certainly want it to fit you and be comfortable. So as I'm sitting on the bike, I'm going to test out all the controls. So I'm going to give the clutch a few pulls, make sure that that feels good, that it's not too sloppy, it's not stiff. Sometimes you'll get a clutch cable that's just really locked up, that clutch is extremely hard to pull. So if that clutch is hard to pull, just know that it could need a new cable. It could just need the lever cleaned out. Then I'll roll the motorcycle forward and backward. I'll try that front brake, make sure that's gripping all right, and I'll do the same with the rear brake as well. So the brakes feel really good. You'll want to try out the throttle. Make sure that that snaps back to its resting position. If it doesn't, that could be a few different things, but we're just trying out all the controls. Flip some switches, make sure all the switches, turn signals, make sure everything has good motion. So it all does. The bike feels good. Now at this point, I like to do a little further inspection on the front of the bike, specifically the brakes and forks, and then on the rear, I'm gonna check out those brakes as well. And I'm also going to look at the chain and sprocket or the drivetrain. So if you have a belt drive motorcycle, shaft drive, you're going to want to look at this rear and make sure that everything is good to go. Now the motorcycle that we've got here today is going to be a chain drive. So there's going to be a drive chain, and then there's going to be a rear sprocket and a front sprocket as well. Now if this motorcycle had a shaft drive system, all you're going to want to do is talk to the seller and ask if that shaft drive fluid, the oil in there, has been changed. Now whatever their answer is there, that's not a big deal. Shaft drive bikes, the oil in it only has to be changed every 25-30,000 miles. It's the easiest thing ever. There's one bolt on the bottom, one bolt on the top. You drain that oil by the bottom bolt, you put it back in, and then you fill it up with oil all the way to the brim of that top bolt. Put your bolt back on. Shaft drives are easy. You don't have too much to worry about there. Belt drive systems are also fairly problem-free, fairly carefree. You're just going to want to inspect the condition of that belt, see if it has any cracks, see if it looks worn, and you'll want to look at the teeth on that sprocket that belt goes around. Make sure that those don't look too worn down. But since we're looking at a chain drive bike here, chain drive systems, they get the most power to the ground, but they experience the most wear and tear. So all I'm doing here is I'm going to inspect the condition of the chain, and you can even have some surface rust on here. You know, I mean, it's not uncommon to see stuff like that. But I'm going to grab that chain and make sure it's still limp and loose and has good motion to it. You know, if the chain seems frozen solid, that's a good sign that that chain is done and you're going to need a new one. And you'll always want to change the chain with the sprockets as well. Sprockets get worn down, the teeth on the sprocket, just as fast as a chain will. So if you put a brand new chain on old sprockets, it's just going to chew through your new chain. So if we get in here and look at these teeth, they still have good shape. I don't see any teeth that are sheared off. You know, sometimes if you get a really powerful motorcycle and they were doing wheelies or racing a lot, you'll see that some of those teeth are literally just missing. They're sheared off. But nothing looks too bad on this. I mean, it just looks like a well-driven motorcycle, and you can easily clean this chain up and get it looking brand new. The sprockets look just fine, so I don't think we have a problem there. And then I'll always give the rear disc and the rear brakes a quick look. So these brake pads, you know, they always start out at just over 1/4 inch, it seems like, of pad on the rear. And these ones, it looks like they have just under 1/4 inch left of pads, so I'd say those brakes are at about 70%. The rotor looks good, so I don't think we have any problems there. I'll glance at the line too, just going up. Make sure I don't see any leaks or dribbles. And like I said earlier, the rear brakes did feel good when we were sitting on the motorcycle and we pressed the brake as we were rolling forward and backwards. It seemed very grabby. So now we're moving up to the front of the bike and we're just gonna check these forks and the front brakes as well. But we have just under 1/4 inch of brake pad left on those, so it looks like we're at 70% on the front brakes. So when we come in here to look at the forks, I'm looking for any fork oil. you know, residue that might be around here. It looks like this right one is totally fine. It looks very clean. But then when we go to the left one here, you can see that there's some residue, some oil up on the top of there. You know, you can see that there's plenty of oil and residue around the fork boot here. So we've got one fork that's gonna be leaking a little bit. So let me just say a couple words about forks quick. So there is a tool out there, it's called a seal mate. It's essentially a little piece of plastic and it kind of has a hook shape on one end of it. Now that is used for cleaning out fork seals. You will run that around the fork, you kind of push it down in that rubber seal, you run it around and you pull it up, and that hook shaped will pull any dirt, gravel, debris that was in that fork seal out. Now a lot of times, actually the majority of times that I go to look at motorcycles and they have a leaky fork, most of the time for me it's been dirty seals. So that $7 tool, you can just run it around there, clean out those forks, and they will not leak a drop from there on out. And how you can kind of decide if that seal mate is going to do the job or if you actually need new fork seals on your bike. So to those fork seals, there's going to be a couple different parts. You have your fork seal, and then on top of that you have the dust cover. So what you can see as we're looking at this fork on top, that top rubber piece, that's going to be the dust seal. So what I will do is if I see a leaky fork, I see some of that oil around, I'm going to look at that dust seal on top. And if I can see cracks in the dust seal, then that to me says it probably needs new fork seals as well. If you see a leaky fork and you look at that top dust seal there and it looks good, you don't see any cracks, I bet 99% of the time you can just run that seal mate around there and you'll fix your forks. So we'll get in here and we'll look and see what that dust seal looks like. The rubber looks good. I don't see any cracks or anything on this right one here. Let's see what the other one looks like. And looking at the other one, I've kind of looked at it around here from a few different angles. I really don't see any cracks on it. So I think some dirt, some dust, something got stuck on this fork up here, and then as the forks went down, it kind of shoved it down into that fork seal, and so it's not making a good seal. There's a little dirt, something in there that's letting a little oil pass through it. I think it's just a job for the seal mate, and that should fix all of our problems there. So now that we've kind of completed our visual inspection of the motorcycle, we'll of course see if it starts up. So you're always going to want that motorcycle to be able to start up. So the motorcycle's running, it started up just fine. You're gonna wanna make sure that bike starts under its own power just fine. And as it's running, you're gonna wanna make sure that there's no weird sounds coming from the engine. You know, if you hear any ticking, knocking, clanking, that's just not a good sign. And then that should tell you that there is bigger problems that need addressed. You know, the engine could be on its way out. So just run away. You know, unless you're looking for a bike to be a crazy project that you're going to replace the engine or overhaul it, new top end, whatever it may be. If you're not looking for a crazy project and you hear weird things coming from the engine, I just call it a day, run at that point. Now we've had a warm day here and we've got a bunch of snow that's melting off, so there's a bunch of water under the bike. Ideally, when you're looking at a motorcycle, don't have it sitting in a puddle of water because you're going to want to check and see if it has any leaks. So usually as the bike's running, I'm just gonna come over and I'm gonna look at the radiator, I'm gonna look at different parts of the engine, around the oil filter, the drain plug, and just make sure we don't have any leaks. So the engine is looking all sealed up, very good. You know, around the oil filter and drain plug, we don't have any leaks there. You know, I'll always look around the radiator, some of these hoses and things, make sure that there's no cracks, make sure it all looks good. And we'll come over and do the same to the other side. Yeah, I don't see any leaks on this bike. It runs good. You'll always give it a couple revs here after it's warmed up. Make sure those gauges work, the tachometer, all your different lights and indicators. And now you're always gonna wanna be able to test drive the motorcycle. And so you're probably gonna need to have cash in hand, something that you can give to that seller, you know, that covers your butt, it covers their butt. But you really do just need to test drive the bike. Now, if this is gonna be your first bike and you don't know how to drive a motorcycle yet, that's totally fine. Just grab a friend, grab somebody who does know how to operate a motorcycle and has a motorcycle license, and bring them with you so that they can test drive the bike. So you're gonna wanna make sure that that bike can go through all the gears. You're gonna wanna experience kind of the full rev range, make sure that it doesn't have some tick or clank in the motor at high RPM, something that you wouldn't be able to tell when it was just sitting here idling. And you'll want that person, whether it's you or whether it's a friend who is riding that bike for you, you want them to kind of get on the throttle a little bit in every gear to make sure that that transmission, make sure it's not slipping out of gear when it's under heavy load or heavy power. And you're gonna wanna make sure that clutch is good as well. So if you or your buddy punch the throttle on that and you hear the RPMs go up, but that bike does not pull forward, you know, that's a sign that the clutch is totally fried on it. Which, not that replacing a clutch is the most labor-intensive job, but to somebody who's never wrenched on anything, that can seem like quite the nightmare. But basically, all we're doing here is make sure that we don't get surprised by anything. The last thing we want is to buy a motorcycle, get it home, be going on a ride, and find out that there is more problems than we initially were able to see or diagnose. Now, if you're going to look at a project and the motorcycle doesn't run, I've done this before on bikes on models that I know very well, to where the seller in the listing says the bike has a dead battery, it doesn't run, but it did run fine back when the battery had a full charge. You're just gonna wanna make sure as best you can that that is indeed the only problem, that it does just need a battery and it runs fine. Now, to always those situations, I will just bring a jump box or a pair of jumper cables, you know, and ask the seller if I can just hook those up and make sure the bike does indeed start and run. Now, if they say no and they won't let you hook up jumper cables to it or a jump box or anything to make sure that it does run, that's kind of a red flag for me. You know, that's something that's so simple, and it's not uncommon that you would ask that to make sure that the motorcycle you're buying does indeed run like they're saying it does. So if they will not let you do that, if the seller won't let you hook those up, I don't know, I might just run from the bike right there unless you have extensive motorcycle knowledge about that model and what the problem could be. You know, the battery could be dead because the stator and the regulator rectifier is totally fried. You know, if it has different aftermarket electronic things installed on it, like underglow lights, you know, say it has speakers, aftermarket lights up front, those could very well be, and in my experience, are oftentimes the cause of a dead battery. Cheap electronics, or when they aren't wired up correctly, so many times I will see a bike that does not have aftermarket parts wired in correctly. And so speaking of that, let me show you one other thing here. So I have bought numerous bikes that had Bluetooth speakers, underglow lighting, auxiliary lights on the front, all wired in. And I've never found a job where this was done correct. It's always just kind of rinky-dinky, wired in by somebody who doesn't quite know what they're doing, and it will always short out your system and drain the battery. So on this bike specifically, right when I looked at it, I could tell that it had aftermarket HIDs put in. So you just see a bunch of wiring and connectors up here. You know, you see these two HID boxes. So when I see stuff like this, I'm always gonna look at factory connections and make sure they didn't start cutting factory wires. You know, I never mind this stuff when it's just a plug and play type setup, but the stuff that requires people to cut factory connectors off or start splicing in wires, sometimes you can really get a Frankenstein job, you know, when you're getting into some of that stuff. But all the wires up there, even though they're everywhere, they're not really routed neatly. It doesn't look like factory harnesses or anything are cut. So when I see stuff like that, I'm always gonna try to get to the battery and have a look at that. So if your battery is just under like a side cover on whatever bike you're looking at, you know, ask the seller if you can take off that side cover just to see the battery. You just want to make sure that nothing is crazy in there, stuff isn't hacked up and chopped up that you'd have a nightmare waiting for you when you get home. But this motorcycle here, so the seat comes off with just using the ignition key. So of course I would use the key, we'll take the seat off and inspect that and see what it looks like. And everything looks totally factory and good to go, so no problems there. So we've looked over the engine, the overall motorcycle, we checked the brakes, the sprockets and chain, the forks, some of the electronics, we let the bike run and everything. Lastly, it's just always good to make sure that all your lights, turn signals, stuff like that work. And of course, I guess just look at the tires and see if those are worn. You know, obviously every vehicle is gonna go through tires, but it just gives you an idea of things that you have upcoming or what you need to address down the road. But yeah, that is everything that I look over, and that's kind of just your basic checklist, what you'll want to go through anytime you're looking at a used motorcycle for sale. So not that that is some all-inclusive checklist that you'll never have a problem with a bike if you check all those things. You know, if you buy a lot of motorcycles, at some point you're gonna get surprised by something, and maybe it's something that the seller didn't even know about because they don't really ride the bike that often, thus the reason that it's for sale. But we're always gonna do our best just to kind of diagnose and see the condition of every little part so that we can kind of anticipate what that bike needs to kind of get an idea of the maintenance that we have ahead of ourselves if we purchase that bike. But also inspecting all those things will give you a good idea of what the value of the bike should be. So I guess just to give you an idea of that, this motorcycle books at $4,600. According to Kelley Blue Book, you know, in good condition with average miles when purchasing from a dealer, $4,600 is where this bike books at. So if we were doing a quick evaluation, kind of just to decide what the value should be, well, we did see those couple scratches, those couple marks on our bar end, our lever, which those aren't expensive, right? We can get new levers and stuff for $20. Bar ends are 10 or 15, but the gas tank there that has a couple scratches, you know, a new gas tank for this bike would be $700. You know, that front plastic fairing piece that had a little ding on it, that's probably a couple $100. There's a little spot on the mirror, which mirrors are cheap, or you could delete them, so let's just say 40, 30 bucks there. Now, as far as wear and tear parts on the bike, you know, the chain and sprockets, the tires, the brakes, it's something you can mention to the seller, but those are just regular wear and tear parts, so even if those were getting down to it that they might need to be replaced, those things don't affect the overall value of the motorcycle for the dollar amount that it would cost to replace them. You know, things like that don't exactly affect the overall value of the motorcycle as much as things like damage on certain parts do. So I guess if I saw this motorcycle for sale, for example, and book on it was 46, say that's what the seller was asking for an asking price as well. Well, with the little scratches it had, and then with that one fork seal being a little bit leaky, now everything on the motor looked completely good. It sounded good, it ran good, say we test drove it, everything was a thumbs up. You know, all the lights, the electronics, the seat was in good condition. You know, if this seller was asking $4,600, I would probably offer him $38. So hopefully that helped some of you guys out. You know, hopefully now you have somewhat of an idea, regardless of what motorcycle you're going to see, of things that you should just check and look over and how those can affect the value. And hopefully this whole video just gives you a better idea of things that you should look for, things to anticipate when buying or looking at a used motorcycle. And like I said, buying a used bike, you're always gonna get the best bang for buck. You know, when you buy a brand new motorcycle, it is brand new. You should have no worries whatsoever going into that purchase in exchange for a much higher purchase price. And then as soon as you leave the dealership on that bike is gonna drop in value as soon as you leave the parking lot. So it just depends what you're looking for. So hopefully this video inspired some confidence for people out there who want to get a bike but just don't quite know. Like I said, it's scary for a lot of people to go get a used motorcycle, or just the idea of going to look at a used bike. But hopefully you've taken some knowledge away from this video and you feel empowered to go look at a motorcycle yourself. So drop a comment if you guys have any questions at all. Otherwise, like the video if this helped you out, subscribe if you guys want to see more, and until next time, have a wonderful night, guys.